Not only were all American babies post-war eating baby food, they were all pretty much eating Gerber. So by the 1960s, 90% of babies were fed commercially prepared products, and 2 out of every 3 were eating Gerber baby food. So a pretty solid lock on the development of infant tastes from a very early age.
Good evening and welcome to the Charles River Museum of Industry and Innovation. My name is Steve Guerrero. I'm the Director of Education here at the museum. You are sitting in the former power plant of the Boston Manufacturing Company, founded by Francis Cabot Lowell in 1814, the first modern factory in the world. And actually Monday is Francis Cabot Lowell's 250th birthday. The power plant here, though, this building is 1911, and it would have had about 10 vertical steam boilers burning coal to power all the engines in the textile mill. But we're here tonight because Francis Cabot Lowell also put into effect the industrialization of the United States. That includes the way we worked, the way we lived, the way we moved, the way we communicated, and the way that we eat. And so I'm really glad tonight to welcome Professor Amy Bentley from New York University, a food historian who's written extensively about the connection between industry, food, our taste buds, science, and the interesting nexus that is both historical and as relevant as ever. Without further ado, I would love to welcome Professor Bentley.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm here to talk about baby food. I wrote a book about it. It was also published in Portuguese a couple of years ago because I had a baby. And I was getting to that point where we were going to feed that baby solid food, and I went to the grocery store and I looked at the aisles and aisles of little jars of baby food, but then also like bibs and baby bottles that had the word Pepsi on it, and just like all of the paraphernalia around infant feeding. And I thought, wow, how did we get to where we are today? And I thought, wait a minute, I'm a food historian, I can figure that out. So that was 30 years ago. That baby is now 30. I had 2 more, which slowed down the process considerably, but it gave me a lot more of testing, different strategies, and more evidence to add to the book. So it's really been a wonderful topic, and I love it because so many people are interested in it. So I look forward to hearing your experiences and questions, because whether you were a baby or you had a baby, everybody has an experience with eating food as an infant and a child. The industrialization of baby food, the main point in my research is that it is an invented product. There was a time there was no such thing called baby food, and then there was a time there was something called baby food. So it was something that was constructed around the 1920s and commercialized, and it had a lot of positives, as I'll talk about, but it also had some negatives, including it plays a part in the story of the displacement of breastfeeding. So we are maybe all familiar with the switch from breastfeeding to bottle feeding, but what we don't know as much is that there was a piece about baby food in that, which we'll talk about. It also, and I think Steve was hinting at this, it primed the commercial baby food and the way it was made and the way it imprinted itself in the culture, created what I'm calling and others call an industrial palate. It primed us to enjoy highly processed, ultra-processed food, and it was naturalized in our culture. There's another really interesting piece that I'll touch upon, is that it's emblematic of what we call the complicated role of the mother consumer. That is, to be a good mother means to be a good consumer, to purchase the right baby stroller and the right onesie and this thing. That means you're a good mother or a good parent. And baby food was front and center in that whole complex of the mother consumer. Basically, what happens, between around 1900 through the post-World War II era is that commercial baby food becomes a naturalized rite of passage. It wasn't a thing, and then it became a thing that most Americans and American babies experienced. And that was because there was this rich confluence of factors that was created like a perfect storm that just primed Americans to be interested and enjoy baby food. The first was the discovery and promotion of vitamins. So vitamins were not discovered until the 1910s. It was not known that fruits and vegetables had important food values. And in fact, there were reasons why people were nervous about fruits and vegetables. But once that was discovered, it was discovered that that would be healthy for people and babies. And that had an impact on baby food. Also, the industrialization of the food supply. This is happening around the turn of the 20th century, and it's happening to the whole food supply. And in baby food, the commercialization of baby food is definitely a part of that. Advertising and marketing is getting going in the 1920s and 30s. Madison Avenue, creating desires, creating fears, and helping us feel inadequate. And so that is definitely a part of the naturalization of baby food. There's also the medicalization of childbirth and infancy, the development of pediatricians, OBGYNs, dietitians that are all claiming space on how to treat a baby, what do we feed that baby. Baby food drops, as I'll demonstrate, to earlier and earlier ages after birth, the feeding of baby food. And it happens because there's no medical evidence to prove that it's not a problem. And in fact, there's reasons why in the culture where it is thought of as a positive. And then part of the story is this post-war American society and cultural climate of American exceptionalism and strength. And baby food, interestingly, tells a story and is part of that. So to give you a snapshot of what happens to ideas and practices about feeding babies solid food, I'm going to give you a few dates. So in the late 19th century, the prevailing advice and practice was exclusive breastfeeding and the introduction of solids late in the first year, when teeth are erupting around 9 months, and fruits and vegetables were not to be fed until well into the second year. Then we move into the 1920s, and you get cleaner water supplies and cleaner milk available, and milk-based formulas, infant formulas, and it becomes more viable to feed a baby something other than breast milk. And so people, mothers, women, especially wealthy women, take to this and start feeding infants bottle feeding. And the age at which an infant is first fed solids starts to drop to anywhere between 6 and 8 months. After World War II, that has dramatically changed, and infants are almost exclusively bottle fed, and solids are introduced at between 4 to 6 weeks of age. And in fact, there's a doctor who writes a famous book who is very proud to talk about how you can start feeding your child solids 24 hours after birth. So it changes very dramatically. Then we see it starting to move up. So in the 1980s, various things we'll talk about create a climate that's more friendly to breastfeeding, and the values are seen as important. And solids move back a little bit, 2 to 3 months after birth seems to be the time that they settle on. And then we get to the 1990s and in today, where we have the standard idea that bottle feeding has its place, breastfeeding is best, you work it out, and solids are introduced between 4 to 6 months, and the World Health Organization is a hard advocate of 6 months after birth. So that's the trajectory, and I have a cool graph to illustrate that. So you watch it just drop dramatically. So by the 1950s and 60s, infants are fed commonly, solids are introduced for about a month, 6 weeks after birth, and then it starts going back up. So when I was researching it, I thought, what is going on here? What's happening that is creating these dramatic shifts in infant feeding practices in the United States? So one is baby food advertising. So baby food gets going in about late 1920s. It's first sold in apothecaries. It's seen as medicinal. Like if your baby is sick and needs some extra strength-producing food, you buy a little jar in a pharmacy. This became more and more popular as vitamins were discovered and isolated, and so you have small manufacturers starting to develop commercial baby food. The first was actually in Rochester, New York. Gerber is already canning fruits and vegetables in Michigan, and there's a big mythological story about how baby food came to be, but upshot is they start making commercial baby food, and it's very, very popular. In the 1930s, through the Depression, through World War II, the numbers keep going up and up and up because it's very convenient. But also there's advertising and other things going on in the culture that are creating the popularity for baby food. And one is baby food advertising. So this is actually an 1880s advertisement for a patent formula. So the milk-based dry formula that you add to milk or water, and Nestle's is one of the first makers. And you can see what advertising already is doing. This is the old Mother Hubbard in her shoe, and it says, "There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she knew not what to do. Some she had nursed, and some bottle fed, but those raised on Nestle's food came out far ahead." And so already advertising is telling consumers, telling women, you choose between the two, guess which one is better. And so it's preying on the insecurities of parents for whom feeding an infant is a very serious, important job. In the late 1920s, you have the first Gerber baby ad. And so Gerber starts producing its food, and it has a woman do a little sketch, pen and pencil sketch, and it captivates the audience, and it becomes the logo. And in fact, at one point, it was the most widely recognized advertising icon in the United States. And there's a whole cultural thing you could do with the big doe eyes. It's looking right at you. It's very vulnerable, but it just becomes popular, and Gerber really plays on it, and it advertises in doctors' magazines and nurses' magazines and dietitians' magazines and ladies' magazines to promote its product. This is an advertisement. It's too hard to see and read, but it's from the Ladies' Home Journal in 1938. And the caption is, "Hurry, mother, it's Libby's time. Tiny babies love the vegetables that Libby prepares so carefully." And it's a little picture of a pretty young-looking infant, and I would say around 2 months of age, maybe. And what the advertising, again, is doing is it's demonstrating that tiny babies love Gerber, love Libby's. Small babies, it's in the makers' and advertisers' best interest to promote baby food at earlier and earlier ages so they can sell more food. Here's another one, "All set for the next step, honey." And this baby's so young it can't even sit up. It's lying on it, or so at least it looks like. And so there's all these, advertising about why Gerber cereal is the best and why it's so great for little babies. And it's just very, very effective advertising. So also a piece of this story is this post-war material abundance that creates conditions so that baby food can be readily available to the population. You first have this changing landscapes of grocery stores. You move from the green grocer who had cans or food behind him, and that you would ask what you wanted and they would pull it down, to more modern grocery stores. And this is a grocery store in 1941. And they were bigger and they had more stuff. And baby food makers would be sales reps who would go into grocery stores and say, "Can I come and set up a display of baby food for you? Can I rotate the product? Can we run sales and specials?" And so you had a whole cadre of salesmen going in all over and creating these baby food displays. So grocery stores are changing and are accommodating the rise of commercial food. And in fact, here we go into the baby boom era, and there are a lot of babies to feed. I think this one is even in Boston. This is a grocery store in 1948, and you've got whole aisles of jars of baby food at this point. In 1948, baby food was the most popular commercially produced product in the 10 most, I have to get this right in my head, 10 most populated American cities. It was not only that, but it was sold twice as much as the next competitor, and the next competitor was evaporated milk, which was also used in baby formula, especially in the South. So we're in the baby boom era. They're catering to those women, to those parents who are going in and shopping, and they know that baby food is a draw. If they can get the mothers who are buying baby foods in, then they're going to get the shopper who's going to spend a lot of money in the grocery store. So this dramatically changes what food is available, baby food available for people to buy. This is a great, Life magazine did this whole spread on baby food, and this is one of the pictures. It was in 1962, I believe, and these are all twins, and they're all eating their baby food. It's pretty great. There's also this thing that we mentioned called baby food and the ideal mother. And so you get to, part of the advertising is telling women what a mother looks like. And here is the oddly situated baby on the mother's lap. You know, she's feeding the baby with a spoon in front of her. That's not really how we feed babies, but it's for the advertising, right? The baby has a bib on. The baby is being fed with a spoon. The woman is beautiful. She's got coiffed hair and red lipstick and manicured nails. And it's sort of a Madonna and child picture. And it's really playing off that mother-child dyad and that sort of idealized idea about what a mother is and does. And in this post-war period, the accoutrements of infant feeding were really, really important. So people would send a silver spoon from Tiffany's for a baby gift. It was very, very important and a marker of a civilized society to put your baby in a high chair, to put a bib around it, and to spoon feed that baby. And there was lots of articles and images contrasting this civilized way that we feed babies in the post-war American landscape compared to women with naked breasts in a country breastfeeding her baby, in National Geographic, for instance. That there was contrast actually pointing out. We are civilized, we feed our babies formula and solid food from silver spoons in comparison to some people in the world. So all that is going on that is shaping ideas about baby food and its importance in American culture. Okay, but baby food also is an industrial product. So when maybe commercially canned food in general was getting going, it's manufactured in a particular way because you need it to be safe. It needs to be shelf stable. It can't get botulism. It can't kill anybody. And so they have to prepare all canned food, including baby food, in a particular way. They have to make sure the jars or the cans are sterilized. They have to cook it at a super, super high heat. And to maintain the integrity of that food, they have to add things to it. So sometimes a sulfurous aroma or off flavor will occur as a result of that canning. So you might need to put some artificial flavors back. Sometimes the texture changes, or the water will separate from the solids, and so you need to add an emulsifier to make it stay together. Sometimes the vitamins are compromised, so you need to add in vitamins. The color may turn pale and kind of unappealing, so you need to put back some artificial coloring. Sometimes it's bland, so you might need to add salt. Think of canned peaches. You might need to add sugar. There's just a lot of things they are putting in commercially canned food to make it feel more appealing and more like food that people are familiar with. So baby food makers are making that food in the exact same way. No one told them they should do it any differently. No one told them they shouldn't put in sugar and salt. And no one told them they shouldn't make baby food desserts. They're trying to appeal to a general population. And so you have baby food that's full of all of those things that regular canned food is full of. Now, in the 50s, one baby food maker commissioned a study from the famous Mad Men Ernest Dichter and the Institute for Motivational Research. This was the original Mad Men guy on Madison Avenue, who was really great at developing consumer desires. And so this baby food manufacturer was like, our baby food is not selling well. What are we doing? Can you do a study? So this company went out across the United States and interviewed, it's an amazing piece of data, mothers mostly, from careful to make a variety of social class, social economic status, and region to try to get the broadest understanding possible about what baby food mothers liked. And they didn't interview the baby, they only interviewed the mothers who purchased that baby food. So they asked them, what is important to you in a baby food? And these are some of the things. So for them, brand awareness was crucial. It had to be a brand they trusted and they liked, that had a lot of trust out there. Taste was important, but not all kinds of taste. And this is the data that this study is gathering. And so I just put little smiley faces and frowny faces next to it. It couldn't have a bitter taste. That was bad, according to these people they interview. It couldn't be sour. Sometimes a little salty was okay. Sometimes bland was also okay. It couldn't be tangy. It couldn't be spicy. It had to be sweet. And seasoned usually meant salted. And so those were the positive attributes of baby food they liked. And these were some flavors that they did not like in baby food. They did not want to see and they wouldn't purchase. They questioned texture, appearance, and aroma. What do you like in a baby food? Well, people didn't like if it was lumpy. They didn't like if it was watery. They liked it if it was smooth. They wanted it to be consistent. They didn't want it to be pale in color. They wanted to have a bright, vibrant color. Distinct, weak was like, somebody didn't like a tomatoey smell and someone liked a bacon smell. But mostly we don't want it lumpy, watery. We want it smooth. We want it consistent. We want it to have a vibrant color. So the study concludes, okay, the ideal baby food product is smooth and consistent, has a pleasing, vibrant color, a distinguishing aroma but not too off-putting, is seasoned in a manner similar to other canned food products, that is with sugar or salt or however adults are used to tasting canned food, has great visuals, product design, inspiring confidence, and cultural capital. And so guess what baby food comes out on top? Gerber. And the study said, I'm sorry, Gerber, this is the reason why Gerber is number one, because it fulfills all of these ideals of what baby food is for these consumers. So this other baby food company went out of business pretty fast. But these, I think, are just stunning statistics that had a monopoly. Not only were all American babies post-war eating baby food, they were all pretty much eating Gerber. So by the 1960s, 90% of babies were fed commercially prepared products, and 2 out of every 3 were eating Gerber baby food. So a pretty solid lock on the development of infant tastes from a very early age. Remember, the average age of introducing baby food is 4 to 6 weeks of age, 1 month. And this is great. This is a representation of 1970s of the number of baby food jars it's estimated that a baby eats in 1 year, 72 dozen. So that was from the Center from Science in the Public Institute, who starts pushing back against the lock on baby food. But I love that image. Okay, we get to the 1960s and 1970s. These are years of pushback. These are years of dissent. This is years of questioning authority and of turning a shining light on the food industry as well as other industries. So baby food gets the spotlight in the same way the Ford Pinto does and other commercial products. There are medical studies that are showing that the additives in foods maybe aren't so great. So MSG, modified salt, if we have so many of these in the food, that might not be, or it might compromise our health. And they start testing baby food. And maybe we shouldn't feed babies so early. Maybe their GI tracts aren't ready. Maybe they can't refuse it. Maybe breast milk is healthier and formula. Maybe that has all the things a baby needs in those early months of life. There are critics of baby food labeling. I'm going to show you a baby food label so you'll see why in a minute. There are laws that make pet food require more transparency on pet food than on baby food. And so consumers start going, hey, what is up with that? Why don't you tell us what's in this baby food? And so they start pushing back on companies. And then we know there's going on internationally are critics of formula, Nestle formula, that's going into countries all over the world and compromising the health of babies if parents can't afford enough or don't have clean water. So there's a lot of tumult and pushback and questioning of baby food, solid baby food, as well as formula in the 1960s and 70s. And so this is that label. And I was doing some research up in Canajoharie, New York, and there was the beech nut baby food factory right there. And it was sort of in chaos. That was kind of winding down. And I said, can I, come in and look around? And someone was like, sure, go ahead. There's a big drawer of stuff over here. So I start pulling out all of these labels. I didn't take any because I was too principled, but I took a lot of pictures. But I thought, nobody was doing anything with them. But these are labels from, I think, the early 1960s. These are two of the same, and this is a different one. So this is carrots in butter sauce. And it has ingredients here. They're probably too small for you to read, but here's the ingredients. And they did have to put ingredients in order of volume, like the greatest volume first and then on down. So the first ingredient is carrots. The second ingredient is light brown sugar. The third ingredient is sugar. The fourth ingredient is butter, and then we have salt, and then some water. So think about it. That's a baby food. Maybe it's 70% carrots, but then we've got two kinds of sugar, salt, and butter, for a 2-month-old. And here we've got some applesauce and raspberries, apples, sugar, water, raspberry puree. That is a little less egregious, but sugar is a very, very common ingredient in baby food then, and even today, not maybe sugar, but pear concentrate. It's a very easy flavor for babies to love. Baby food companies start getting attacked. They start getting consumers riled up. They start by pushing back, oh, no, we've got great food. But then they start relenting. And so you have responses. They start taking out ingredients. They start organic lines. They discontinue baby food desserts. So they respond to consumers' desires and interests. The recommended age of introducing solids starts to creep back. So it goes from that 1 month to 2 to 3 months to 4 to 6 months. There's that trend going on. Commercial baby food stays solid. There is homemade baby food that comes on in the 1970s especially, and it comes back in the early 2000s. And even today, plenty of people make their own baby food. But commercial baby food remains strong. It changes a little bit. And that's because it's convenient and it allows flexibility. You could argue it's one of the things that allows women to go back to work. You can take it and stick it in your bag and move. And so it's a product of convenience in a country that loves convenience and mobility. And so it plays an important role. And in fact, there's some really interesting studies about commercial baby food that show some commercial baby food has protective factors for infants. We'll get into this in a little bit, but 1 in 10 Americans eats the recommended number of fruits and vegetables per day. 1 in 10. So if you're not one of those families, the food you feed your children there's probably not a lot of fruits and vegetables. But if you buy little jars of baby food, it's really easy to choose squash and green beans and experiment beets, corn, and the studies are showing that babies who are fed jarred baby food, for the most part, eat a wider variety of fruits and vegetables longer than children who don't. And once they go off commercial baby food, the number plummets, and the vegetables they eat are potatoes and tomatoes, probably in the form of French fries and potato chips and ketchup and pizza and tomato sauce. So they do have this really important protective factor. So I'm always very careful to defend commercial baby food for the positive values that it has. Okay, Big so what question. When I wrote this book, I was like so interested. It was like, this is such an interesting topic. Isn't everybody going to be interested in it? And I sent it away to the press, and I got some reviewers back. And one big question was like, why should we care about this? And I'm like, what? You should care about it. But I thought, yeah, no, that's a really good question. Why should we care about this? What is a larger so what? How can I link it to larger issues and things going on today? And that thing is, we can't make a correlation, but we can make an assumption that the connection between this history of commercial baby food and the way baby food was made, and how early, at what early age it was fed to babies, and how it created this template of flavors and tastes, that it would make sense that that would have some connection to our current food system and flavor preferences in the United States. So I think so. Just quickly to talk about the American industrial palate, this is a figure from the 2011-12 USDA dietary guidelines showing basically what Americans eat. And it's hard to read all of this, but this is stuff that Americans were not eating enough of, like whole grains, vegetables, fruits, milk, fiber. And this is stuff that Americans are eating up to 3 times more than they need. And these are basically solid fats and added sugars. So this is what we're really good at eating because of our highly processed, ultra-processed food supply and how prevalent it is. And this is what we struggle to get enough of. And this is a really great website if you're interested. It's called What the World Eats, put out by National Geographic. And it's got maps of countries and the types of food that they eat. And this is a wheel signifying what the daily calories of the people in the United States and breaking it into different components. And this purple is the solid fats and added sugars. And that's 37% of calories come from that. And the world average is about 20%. And now we're talking about ultra-processed food, and about 60% of food Americans eat is ultra-processed. And for kids, it's higher. So it really is entrenched in our food supply in this entrenched way. So what I'm offering is perhaps commercial baby food helped to prime this pump, helped acclimate Americans to the textures, flavors, and aromas of ultra-processed food that then made it so easy to create our food habits around. So just briefly, because I'd like to hear your questions, what's next for commercial baby food? What are the hot topics in baby food today? First, the good news is that we've decided maybe this needs rethinking, that maybe we're not doing it the best way. Maybe there are other people out there in other countries and cultures that have done this a little bit more successfully than us. So there's this whole rethinking of first foods, and I haven't written anything else on baby food, but if I were to write one thing, I would write it on white rice cereal, which is super interesting, and I can go into it if you're interested. But it used to be like the first food without question. Now, have you ever tasted that stuff? Like, I never tasted it when I fed our kids up, but it's like paste, and it has no texture and no flavor. And now we're understanding that you can feed the first food can be an avocado, or it can be mashed up beans, or it can be, congee, or just a variety of things. It can have some spice and some flavor in it even. So we're rethinking the idea about first food. Someone mentioned allergies earlier. Allergies is another huge story because at some point, pediatricians thought that if we delayed foods that might cause allergies, that was better. So no peanuts, no eggs for the first 6 months, whatever. Introduce the foods very, very slowly. And then we realized that that was about the wrong thing to do, and that was helping exacerbate allergies. And so now we're kind of slow walking it back, and we're trying to figure out how to introduce foods earlier to sort of inoculate kids to becoming susceptible to allergies. So that is a super interesting story. And then the other story that is really gaining a lot of traction is this, I called baby food an invented product, and now we're coming back around to that. And there is a whole group of people out there known under the umbrella called baby-led weaning, which is sort of questioning the idea of of mushy food for babies anyway. Like maybe you should just breastfeed or bottle feed your baby to 6 months, then sit them in a high chair and then just throw food at them and let them eat table food. And so I'm thinking, like this was an invented category, maybe we don't need it, here's the reasons why. So that's a pretty interesting thing going on. But I think the most interesting thing to me is that no matter what period you're in, it could be the 1920s, it could be the 1950s, it could be the 2025, what you feed your baby, when you feed that baby, under what conditions may change the timing, the first food. But what doesn't change is the anxiety that a mother in particular feels when thinking about what do I feed my baby. It's a very serious job if you think about it. You know, a fetus in utero is literally feeding off the body of its carrier. And then once born, if the baby is breastfed, again, literally being fed by a body. So the moment of weaning and starting food is a really serious, symbolic, anxiety-filled moment for a lot of people. And there's a lot of really interesting first food rituals that go on in different cultures that are marking that really important time. I'll just leave it there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Amy. I'll take some questions, but can I ask one first?
Sure.
Where does formula fit in? Wasn't there a couple years ago, like one factory closed and there was a shortage of formula? Is that considered a baby food? Is it considered medicines?
Yeah, you know, in the beginning, those formulas were called food, infant food. They used the term food, and I surmised it was because maybe it started as a granule powder that you mix with water, or just food as in not milk or water kind of thing. But it was thought of as a food. But formula becomes an entrenched and important part of the baby food story. Not all people can breastfeed, not all people want to, and so having another safe, reliable form of infant liquid is really important. I don't know the story of that, but I think that only 2 manufacturers were making it. And when the hurricane in Asheville, I think, knocked out the Abbott lab, I think that knocked out like a huge portion of baby food, infant formula. And so there was not like stockpiles. A lot of it's exported to other countries. And so I just think that the people were not prepared. So it was an interesting crisis moment.
It looks like you've looked at some other countries. Is there a country that you feel has got it right? I remember when I was young, I lived in Japan for a year, and I remember that the babies in the neighborhood were nursed until 3-4 years old, and then you kind of see them chawing on a sweet potato, which is great, great food, and then running to be nursed again, and But is there a culture that you feel has got it right?
I don't know. I haven't done that much research on it, and I think practices are embedded in particular cultures for particular reasons, like you suggest. Are there commercial foods? Are there not? Is breastfeeding the norm? Cultures are using what they have to feed their babies. I know some cultures, the mothers masticate the food, chew the food, and then feed it to their baby, to kind of pre-soften it, and that becomes a very intimate form of, you're feeding your baby something else, but it's still sort of coming from you in an interesting way. I know in France, I think breastfeeding levels are pretty low, and they feed their baby solids like at 2 to 3 months. So it's earlier, the norm is earlier in the United States, and they're like, I don't know. I don't even know if I would say is there a perfect one. I mean, probably Sweden does it really well, I guess. But I remember for this project, I interviewed my mom. I said, what did you feed me? And we had a really great discussion. And I was a baby boomer baby, and she's like, I was the third of 4. She's like, are you kidding? We bottle fed you, and we fed you Gerber baby, and it was the best. You know, she was like so very unapologetic. And, you know, I turned out okay. So, like a question I often get is like, what should I feed my baby? And I'm like, well, you know, you give them a lot of love, you give them a lot of care, you keep them warm, you feed them sufficiently, like you cover the basics, and then you do what you can and what feels right for you, and there's a lot of latitude within that, I think that partly answers your question.
Anyone studied any correlation between the age of introduction to the variety of solid foods and picky eaters?
Well, that's a really good question. There are some studies that show if you wait too long, it can lead to pickiness. If there's sort of a sweet spot, like 5 to 6 months, you know, something where the baby's very interested in food, like they're grabbing at food, they can sit up, so their GI tract is developed enough to what's that word? Well, there's that. Digest. I was looking for something a little, but yeah, that too. And that moment you should sort of seize on. And sort of the baby-led weaning folks are like, just make this natural. You know, like if the baby's interested, try it out, see what's going on. You know, make sure they don't choke. But make the goal, especially in the early first months, is to not feed a baby, it's to expose a baby to foods. Because sometimes it takes like 10 to 15 encounters with a food before that kid is even going to be interested and maybe put it in its mouth. So you can't say, oh, my kid doesn't like broccoli because I fed it twice. That's just not enough. I mean, really that first feeding is just like getting babies introduced to the idea that food is something other than liquid and mildly sweet. And there's texture in it, and there's color in it. There's been these super interesting psychology studies in Britain that showed that if babies go from formula to breast milk to stuff like applesauce and bananas and crusts of bread, the messages they're getting is that food is white, food is sort of bland and sort of sweet, and anything that's vibrant colors or different textures is not food, and therefore they're not going to try it. So picky eating sometimes is just like, you just gotta put it in the ether, create it, make the environment something that's where eating and trying is fun and natural, and you know the last thing you want to do is go eat, try it, you know, like stress, you know. So just sort of like make it a fun, enjoyable, pleasurable activity. I can't remember if I answered your question or not.
Thank you. Okay, so a couple of things. One is that in all the advertising, the babies are white, you know,
Yeah.
especially, you know, the Gerber baby. Oh my goodness. And the other question I have is about Nestle. I mean, to this day, I try to avoid Nestle products, and I'm just wondering, have they reformed?
Two good questions. Yeah, there finally were babies of color in advertising in about the late 70s and 80s, and that's in some ways when it really just starts in general. But they're starting to advertise in Ebony magazine and Chet, and even some mainstream magazines, and so you're getting babies of different ethnicities in, and you see it now more. But you know, definitely the Gerber baby, others just, you know, it was definitely the ideal platonic version of a baby, definitely. Yeah, Nestle, you know, people feel differently about Nestle. You know, Nestle is a bad actor, I think, still in the formula world. I think they still just kind of do what they want, although maybe they're a little bit more discreet. But Nestle also produces high energy, like peanut, I don't know if they do the peanut bar, that's the famous one, but they do these high energy protein bars to get food into like famine areas that are very effective, have a lot of nutrients and calories, but because they're Nestle, they still have this tainted reputation. So it's, you know, I get it. They probably need to do a little bit more to rehabilitate their reputation, and because that definitely continues. I haven't kept up with the research, but when I wrote the book, they were sort of barreling their way into Guatemala still, and kind of challenging the guidelines. Yeah.
Is there any correlation between the age of introduction of foods to allergies? I know in Israel, they did a study with Israeli Jews and similar Jews in the UK, and there was hardly any peanut allergies in Israel because they give the kids bombas, a little peanut snack.
Yeah. And when I was finishing the book, those studies were just coming out, and I was like, oh man, I'm glad the book took me so long, because I could tell that story, like going from like the don't feed peanuts, for the first year, to these studies that were coming out to like proving that it had some beneficial effect to warding off allergies. And so finally, doctors and dietitians are on board and understand that you should not. The problem with what the advice was is that to ward off allergies, to ward off problems, they said introduce one food every 7 days, to see if your baby reacts to it. Well, if you're doing one food every 7 days, that's going to take like 5 years before you, introduce all the foods. So, that was just not practical, or not, and not introducing kids to flavor and taste and texture, like getting them acclimated to these different kinds of food that are going to be an important part of their, palate development. So I think, because of those studies and others where they were understanding, but there's now there's companies that will sell you like little inoculations. Like, of course, everything is commercialized. You can't just do like a little peanut butter. You have to get the special, expensive, anti-allergy peanut thing that is being sold. Yeah.
Can I ask, where does meat fit in if families choose to feed meat?
Well, in the very, very beginning, Gerber made liver. That was a very important selling baby food flavor, baby food product. That kind of went out, as liver itself became less popular. There's definitely been an emphasis on grains and fruits and vegetables, but meat has always been a part. And you look at baby food manuals, baby care manuals, and they'll talk about meat. Meat feels scary, I think, to some parents. Fish, but if you think about it in terms of kind of if you eat meat, balanced, kind of exposing kids to flavors and textures, and if you just want your kid to eat the food that you eat, just chop it up really well and stick it on the high chair, then meat will be a part of it. And if they're not eating good sources of protein, then you need to figure that out. I think that kids who can be healthy vegetarians and vegans, they just really need a lot of care and attention, because so much is going on in little bodies in those early months. So, but meat is interesting. Yeah.
I grew up in an Italian-American family, so meatballs were always there for the
Well, and what a perfect baby food, perfect and seasoned, all stuff. There were these crazy baby food, that was another thing in the 80s. You get all this stuff like expensive baby food makers and steamers and all these elaborate baby food recipe books. One was a recipe for making, I want to say not bouillabaisse, but like a whole thing, like you make a whole meal and then you grind it up. And they were just silly baby food books. I think you can give guidelines that might be interesting, but it's not hard to take a sweet potato, microwave it, mash it up, feed it to the kid. There's different ways you can do it. You don't need to buy an expensive, apparatus and recipe book.
Can I ask one last question before we wrap up, which is, where do you see the industrial food movement going next? Or what are you most curious about?
How much time do we have? I will say this, we're in a super interesting moment. Not only because of Robert F. Kennedy and the MAHA movement. Here's this person with these scary ideas, but he does want to reform the food industry. I feel like the food industry is so strong and so adept at warding off reform. I think I don't know much is going to change there, although I think they are taking red dye out of food What is going to be interesting to watch is the effect that the GLP-1 drugs have on the food supply. So these are the Ozempics, Wegovy. I think 12% of Americans are on these, and it's expected to go up to 20, 30%. What the drugs do is apparently change your taste. And people are less interested in that highly ultra-processed foods and more interested in fruits and vegetables, proteins, and meats. And so the food industry is kind of freaking out, and you see bakery sales drop, you see packaged foods drop, and so they're just running to try to catch up and try to develop new protein bars, because you do need a lot of protein on these drugs. Wouldn't it be great if they made new hummus or new baby carrot, like created snacks and foods that were less processed? And maybe they will get there if the taste effect permeates most broadly. And think about it. Think about a family, maybe where one or more of the adults are on these GLP-1s, and they are craving more fresh, less processed foods. If they have children in the house, that child may grow up to have a food environment that is less, like this, and more that's about food that we probably should be eating. So it'll be really interesting to watch. I mean, not that I'm an advocate of like the drugs changing the food supply, but it is what it is. So, yeah.
Professor Bentley, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.